the Book of Ruth, which comes right after the Book of Judges. As we looked last time in the Book of Judges, it was easy to be overwhelmed by the disappointment in the struggle with the Book of Judges, the disappointment with the reality of sin and inability to take over the Holy Land in a way that was just and life-giving. Judges who were constantly falling and failing in their leadership, even though they were called by God, they continued to disappoint. The Book of Judges ended with this phrase: "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what he thought best." And now we look at the Book of Ruth, which is a very humble book in the Old Testament. Humble in many ways. It is humble because of its length. It's the shortest of the books in the Old Testament. It only has 4 chapters. It's humble because it tells a very simple story, and some would say even a simplistic story, an idealistic story, a love story between Ruth, the Moabite woman, and Boaz, a just man of Israel. The Book of Ruth recounts the story of that took place during the bloody and dark ages of the time of the Judges. And so it's interesting that it was not included as part of the Book of Judges, but it has its separate place in the Old Testament, right after Judges and before the Book of Samuel. The Book of Ruth is humble because it presents us with a ray of hope in the midst of difficulties and struggles, a ray of hope that offers a beautiful gift to all of us who perhaps sometimes are finding the world we live in as disappointing and dark and overwhelming. And yet, even in the midst of that darkness, even if it's not known or seen or recognized by many, there are these simple individuals who, when they follow the will of God and live their faith, are able to bring about incredible hope for the world. My friends, welcome to another episode of our Bible study, as we look at the Book of Ruth. And I really want to tell you, the Book of Ruth is a book of hope and love. It is a love story between a man and a woman that not only tells a historical event of 2 people falling in love, both who were God-fearing and God-loving people in the midst of a situation that was complicated and difficult, but this love story between these 2 people also points towards a greater love story between God and his people. And that God comes to us also in a very humble and simple way, in the way in which love was made manifest in this humble book to these humble people living in a very dark time. First, let's situate ourselves. Now, this is a book that you could read in 20, maybe 30 minutes. Only 4 chapters. You could sit down and read right through it and enjoy it for its simplicity and beauty and positivity. The book begins with a migration. And so it begins with Naomi, who is the woman who, along with her husband and 2 sons, travel to the land of Moab in search for food. There was a famine in the Holy Land where they lived. Where did they come from? They came from Bethlehem. So we begin at the very start. Once in the time of Judges, there was a famine in the land. Now, does that strike you as familiar from the past? There was also a famine in the book of Genesis when Jacob had to send his sons to Egypt in order to gain food. And so this is a reversal. They are now in the Holy Land, and there's a famine in the Holy Land, and they have to travel outside in search for food. They go to the land of Moab, and Moabites were the enemies of the Israelites, and yet they go there out of desperation. Let's take a look at Let's take a look at the map here, just to situate ourselves with the land of Moab. If I can just bear with me here for just a moment. Oh, no, that's not what I want. That's not what we want. Okay, let's try again. Window capture. Here we are. So here's the map, and we see from Bethlehem, which is just on the northwest side of the Salt Sea, traveling around through the north, through Jericho, to the land of Moab on the east side. This is where they traveled and they settled as a family. And so we'll continue here. They go to Moab, and a great tragedy happens as the husband of Naomi dies, and she is left with her two sons. The two sons marry two women from the land of Moab, and then the sons die. This will already seem as a test, because when we will read the book of Job, we will also see that God permits a certain test which comes with taking away, purifying of the things that we are accustomed to, the things that we embrace, even the death of our loved ones, taking those away, so that our faith in God may be shaken but not destroyed. And so here we already see the same reality happening, where Naomi is left alone with the two daughters-in-law. And the two daughters, Ruth and see, this is the interesting thing, and Orpah. The interesting thing is the main characters are Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz, as we will find. So the names of the sons are only mentioned once. They're at the beginning, and then they die. The name of the husband once, and he dies. It signifies to us that those are not the important names or characters that we need to remember. The same is true with Orpah, one of the daughters-in-law. Her name is not mentioned much longer, because as we will see, what will happen is the two daughters will be given a choice to go back to their old way of life, so that they may not experience poverty and pain, which was part of the experience for those who had no men in their lives. Here is a map, and I just want to thank the Bible Project for creating these nice maps, these nice summaries of the books in the Bible. and I've been using them just to help us situate ourselves. In the book of Ruth here, we have in the first chapter, as we were saying, the tragedy and death that happens. And as you can see, we have Naomi left with the two daughter-in-laws, Ophrah and Ruth. And Naomi encourages them to go back to their old way of being, to their own land, as Naomi wants to return back to Bethlehem. She heard that fortunes in Bethlehem have turned and that there is some food now available. And so in her grief, she just wants to go home. She wants to return home. But she knows that she cannot provide for these girls. And so out of kindness for them, she encourages them to go back to their own families now that her sons have died, their husbands have died. And Orpha returns. She listens to Naomi and returns home. But Ruth insists that she will stay with Naomi. And this is just a beautiful sign of the faithfulness of this young woman who accepts the reality of poverty out of her loyalty to Naomi, and not only to Naomi, but also to the newfound faith in God, in the God of Israel. And so she says, "Where you go, I will go, and your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." These beautiful words of Ruth, which set the scene and show us that here are people who are, Ruth primarily, but also Naomi. They are people who are willing to embrace even poverty as long as they remain faithful to God and to their people. And so they return to Bethlehem. Now, think of Bethlehem. Bethlehem, we always think of the birth of Jesus. We also think of the birth of King David. And here is a connection with this family, because as we will learn, there is the importance of the faithfulness of Ruth here, and her willingness to accept the unknown future by being faithful to Naomi, to the people of Israel, and to the God of Israel, will bring about the necessary lineage for Jesus himself, who is to be born in the city of David, and David will be the great-grandson of Ruth, as we will find out. But let's continue here in chapter 2. We see how over and over again the faith and the faithfulness of these two women is on display. So in chapter 2 we hear that Naomi and Ruth, now that they are back in Bethlehem, and knowing the law of Moses, Ruth displays her knowledge of the law by saying that she will go and look for food by going into the fields and picking up after those who are collecting the harvest. So we read here in chapter 2. Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go and glean ears of grain in the field of anyone who will allow me this favor." Naomi said to her, "Go, my daughter," and she went. So this was a provision given in the law of Moses out of love and respect for the poor, that anyone who was harvesting anything in the fields was supposed to leave some edges of the fields with the grain still there for the benefit of the poor, so that the poor were able to also go and collect something for themselves. And so they're simply showing here that they know the law of the Lord, and that they want to provide for themselves by accepting their own poverty, the reality of their own poverty. And as Ruth goes, she happens to encounter this man Boaz, who is a very important figure here, because Boaz is described here as a very good and righteous man, a simple farmer, but one who has plenty of material goods to go around, but also one who is righteous and kind. And so when he encounters Ruth in his field, and he sees that she is the woman who came from the land of Moab, she is a foreigner, and he approaches her and sees that she is exercising her right as a poor refugee to collect some of the barley from the harvest. He treats her with great respect, and he even encourages her to continue to glean in his field, that she will be safe there. He will make sure that she is able to do this and provide for her mother-in-law. And so here's a beautiful, already beautiful sign in the midst of this book of Judges, which is filled with so much negativity, we could say. We see a righteous man who is going out of his way not only to worship the God of Israel and to be kind to the people who work for him, but also to show kindness and respect to the foreigners and the poor people who come and offer kindness to them. Now, the important thing here is that Boaz was a kinsman, and the phraseology that uses Boaz is Kinsmen Redeemer. And so when Ruth goes back home and tells Naomi that she was able to collect all this food in the field of Boaz, Naomi is overwhelmed. Why? Because Boaz is a very close relative, and in the Mosaic law, the close relative was referred to as Kinsman Redeemer. What that meant was that if someone fell into trouble and lost their land and ended up in poverty and the husband died, the close relative had the opportunity to redeem this woman, to buy back her land, and to marry the wife of the deceased relative, male relative, so that his offspring, he could have offspring for his relative. And so this for Naomi is an opportunity, because she is seeing now the kindness that Boaz is showing to Ruth, and the kindness that is given to Ruth from someone who is able to redeem them, from someone who is by law not only able but expected to be the redeemer of the poor and the destitute. But in order for the kinsman redeemer to act, the woman had to make the first move. This was the beautiful thing, that he could not approach Ruth and say, now, I am the kinsman redeemer, your husband died, I will now take you as my wife. He could not say that. It was the woman who had the right to go and choose the relative and demand from him that he redeem her according to the law of Moses. And so we see here already the kindness of Boaz, the humility and simplicity of Ruth, and God somehow putting all of this together, not only for a beautiful romantic story, but also to show how already this is pointing towards the reality of God, who is our Redeemer, Jesus Christ, and the people, and us. You see, and so as the story continues in chapter 3, Naomi encourages Ruth to go and to make that first move, which was hers to make, which is to go and say, would you redeem me? I choose you as my kinsman redeemer to redeem me. And as Ruth presents that proposition to Boaz, see, normally this could very easily happen where a woman would present that, and then the man had no choice. He may be happy, he may be unhappy, but he has to do it by law. But here Boaz responds with joy, with praise, and he says, how blessed I am and how beautiful you are, that you did not go after the young and the wealthy, but you chose me to be your redeemer. He wanted this, see? That's the beautiful thing. He wanted this, but he would not dare make the first move because it wasn't his to make. He was trusting in God and humbly trying to help this woman. And then when she reaches out, he responds, yes, I will. And then the story continues as Boaz in chapter 4 has to go and meet with another relative of Naomi, and who was a closer relative, and so he had the right to be the redeemer before Boaz could redeem Ruth and marry Ruth. He presents this as an opportunity. He says, will you redeem? Do you know this woman? You have the right to redeem the land. Will you do it? He says, yes. Well, but you also have to marry this woman because she comes with the land. And then he says, no, then I will not. And so Boaz says in front of all gathered, then I will do it. And they all applaud. And therefore, Boaz is able, following the law of God, to receive this great gift of the woman he fell in love with and the woman who fell in love with him, for them to come together and make a family. A beautiful end to a tragic beginning, you could say, the beginning where there is death and sadness and hunger and desperation, and then it ends with joy, and the birth of their baby is how it ends, and it ends with the birth of Obed, who is the father of Jesse, who is the father of King David. So the important thing is that in all of this, we see not only how God is able to work in a beautiful way through the poverty and simplicity and trust of people in the midst of difficult situations, but also how this already points to the way God is working with us, because Jesus is our kinsman redeemer, you could say. Jesus is the one, the closest relative, who can redeem us from our sins. But we have to make the first move. Jesus has the power to take everything away, our sin, our frustration, but he cannot force that upon us, just as Boaz couldn't expect that from Ruth. So in a certain sense, you could say that the two of them could also represent us and God. Boaz represents Jesus, who is the Redeemer, and Ruth and Naomi represent all of us, who are, in many ways, we begin our journey with sin and death and desperation in our broken world. But in time, hopefully, this beautiful romantic, in a pure romantic sense, relationship with our Redeemer, from whom we can claim redemption and life and hope if we continue to come to him. I think this is just such a beautiful story for us to reflect on in the midst of our study of the Bible, especially after the book of Judges, to see that even in the midst of difficulties, there's always somewhere God working through people who are open enough to accept reality as it comes and continue to be faithful to God. You know, I always say that to be a Christian, one needs to be a romantic. Because our love for God and our relationship with Him is really a love story, and it needs to touch us not just intellectually, but also spiritually. And I hope that as it does for me, it will do for you as well. The whole story in chapter 4 ends with a genealogy, which is really what we will hear again in the story of the genealogy of Jesus in the Gospels. And so here is how we end the book of Ruth. These are the descendants of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Aminadab, Aminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz was the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of David. All of these names are a small snippet from the genealogy of Jesus. As we read it every year, we read that portion right from here in the genealogy of Jesus. So just think about it. What would have happened if Ruth never said to Naomi, "Where you will go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God." If Ruth went back to her home in Moab and her old gods, I wonder, would there be an Obed? Would there be a Jesse? Would there be a King David? And if no King David, how would we have the descendant of the Davidic line in Jesus by prophecy, the one who came as a descendant of the line of David? So one humble person, one simple person, saying yes to God and accepting the reality of faith she embraced, even in the midst of difficulties, becomes a key in the salvific plan of God that continues. And the same, I believe, is true for us. If our faithfulness may not seem like a big deal today to us, but we don't know what will link our faithfulness with the future events, and how God has already weaved the beauty of salvation through us, dependent in many ways. Other people's salvation and faith and well-being is dependent on our simple yeses in life, just as is the case in the Book of Ruth, this beautiful love story between two people and between God and us. Thank you again for joining me today on this wonderful episode. I think it was wonderful. I love these little gems within the scriptures that are often overlooked because of their simplicity, but they should not be overlooked, because it's usually the humble and the simple that God chooses to do His great work. And so, next time you pick up the Bible, take some time with the Book of Ruth and enjoy it and see in it the beauty that God offers to each one of us. God bless you.